Hi, Rod Fleming in the Philippines here. I hope you're all well. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the formation of the autogynephilic artefact, which is the seat of the erotic target location error in autogynephilia. But before we go there, please remember that we really do need your money. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but it is a fact that we do. We really need you just to put your hands in your pockets. Join the Patreon. It's very, very cheap. Just join the Patreon. And there's extra material gets put up to Patreon regularly, which you won't find on YouTube. So please do that. So, the formation of the autogynephilic artefact. Now, let's put a little bit of history into this. When Ray Blanchard did his initial research into the typology, which at that time was not really well understood, most of the subjects that he saw, which conformed to the autogynephilic model, were elderly, what we call elderly. They were of a median age of 43, and they were always over 30. This caused some problems. He formed a theory which does largely work, but the problem with it was that it was possible to read his work in such a way that it looked as if autogynephilia itself appeared at this later age, 30, 35, 40, 45. And we now know that is not the case. What actually happens is that the autogynephilic artefact, that is the etle, the erotic target location error, actually forms in adolescence. At the point at which the boy starts to masturbate is when it really crystallizes. Now, I think Blanchard was a pioneer. And it's always difficult for the pioneer. You're the first. And this was a field where there were very, very few people working. So this was a simple mistake. It had to do with it wasn't even really a mistake. It was other people really interpreted his information, because Ray Blanchard doesn't go beyond the evidence in his writing. Anyway, what we now know is that autogynephilia actually sets on at adolescence, right? And what will happen is that in various ways it can be suppressed, such that it doesn't actually appear to the rest of the world until later. So it doesn't cause clinical gender dysphoria until perhaps sometime later. And quite often you'll find that in that sometime later there's been a trigger of some kind, maybe an emotional trigger, some other kind of thing. The people used to talk about the male midlife crisis, which doesn't really happen. But that's the sort of thing that, a man could realize that his dreams were not going to be fulfilled as a man, and he already has this autogynephilic artefact who has basically been putting him down all these years, and it's like, well, maybe I could try being a woman, see if that works better. These are the reasons why the elderlies actually appear. They were always autogynephilic. So this asks another question, of course, which is how many men are there out there with autogynephilia that we don't know about? And the answer is we don't know. We simply don't know. Some of those men will actually appear. They'll become clinically dysphoric. Others will just go take it to their graves, perhaps being secret cross-dressers, perhaps just fantasizing about it, being what's called cross-dreamers. They all have autogynephilia. It's just not obvious. And in fact, autogynephilia, until it reaches the point at which the person must change their lifestyle drastically in order to accommodate it, isn't really too much of a problem. It might be a problem keeping it under control, but as long as you do, men live with it all the time. So let's go back to that point at which the autogynephilic artefact is actually established in the mind. It's always at that point of puberty where the boy starts to masturbate. And this does happen in a range of ages, depending on ethnicity and a few other little things, but it's basically between 11 and 14 that this will happen. And technically it's normally called Tanner stage 4 in boys, which is also called the sperm arch. And it's the point at which it's not just that boys start to masturbate, like, I think I'll masturbate today, it's that they actually have the need, they feel a need to release, for sexual release, and so they become eroticized. Children are sexualized from a very early age. They know that their penises and their vaginas give them pleasure if they play with them, right? They know that their bodies give them pleasure, and that's from a very early age. But they don't require that in the sense of needing release, and they certainly don't associate that with having release with perhaps another person. It's just that they know that it feels good when they rub their dicks. And anyway, any parent who has boys knows it. Little boys do this. When they reach the sperm arch, however, they become eroticized. They begin to understand that the sexual pleasure that they enjoy and the sexual release that can come from masturbation can actually come from contact with another human being. And that's when erotics come into it. So it's now is, what kind of person do I want to enjoy this release with? And for most boys, that's going to be a woman. Now that is is called an erotic target. It's not necessarily a real woman just yet, but it's that imagining that you have that later you might call your type. I mean, I've said this before, I come from a generation which was absolutely brought up on images of girls like Sophia Loren. And yes, I like sallow-skinned, wide-cheeked, petite girls with that kind of look. And it's still current today, it's still my type. That will never change. And that was established when I was a kid. And it's the same for everybody. You kind of moderate it over the years because you have contact and reward with real women, but that's always still there. You're modifying the model. You're not just getting rid of it. So what would happen if what we know is that in autogynephilia, instead of the erotic target being located on someone outside the self, that is another person, and that's how it's meant to work, because this is part of the normal human mating system, without which there would be no humans, because we wouldn't mate. But what happens if in autogynephilia, that is reflected back onto the self? Now, one of the problems that we had for many, many years is in looking at elderly autogynephiles, and they're appearing in their 40, 50, sometimes 60, even older, and we go, how on earth could that person become the target of their own erotic desire? It's a mature man, maybe an elderly man, certainly middle-aged, showing the abuses that life has applied to his body and all the things that he's done. He's maybe a little bit overweight, he's maybe bald, he's maybe got, other characteristics that aren't exactly gorgeous. How on earth does that happen? And the answer is, that doesn't happen. Because the autogynephilic artefact is actually formed at the sperm arch at the age between 11 and 14. Now, if you look at boys, even quite masculine boys of that age, they're still not really masculine. They can actually be very feminine. So you take a boy like that, and he maybe puts on a little bit of his mum's or his sister's makeup, puts on a bra and panties, maybe a pair of stockings if you can find them, and sets himself down in front of a mirror to jerk off, and bingo! That is a plausible, passable representation of a girl, right? So that can fit his erotic target. That can be, that's it, that's me. I'm in the mirror, that's me, I'm turning myself on. And that's when it starts. That's where it starts. That image of the self as the erotic target, as the object of sexual desire. And make no mistake, that's where it starts. But what's also important to understand is that's where it stays. The autogynephilic artefact will always be that way, right? It remains stuck. It doesn't mature. It doesn't get older. It remains stuck in the time slot in which it was conceived. Autogynephilic men, and they're dressed in this weird parody of women's fashions, and you go, what on earth is going on here? Does this person dress from thrift shops or charity stores? And yeah, sometimes they do. But what is actually happening is he's recreating what was the fashionable look for a girl at the time that his artefact established itself. So a man of 50 now in 2022 might well be looking at the kind of fashions that were extant in, say, 1985 or 1984. And bingo, when he goes out, he dresses to look like that. And he's wearing these ridiculous short dresses and high boots and the kind of things that perhaps not all women wore, but were certainly used as a representation of the so-called, the sexy woman in that era. So he's actually recreating this image of himself as he was, as a woman, as he was when he was 13, but as a woman. And of course, this is a complete disaster because when everybody looks at this person, they go, gosh, That's a train wreck, which it is, but he doesn't see that. Because when he looks in the mirror, what he sees is himself when he was 14 or 13 or 12 or whenever he started jerking off in his mummy's scanties. That's what he sees. So he shows not the slightest bit of shame in appearing in public looking like this. And everybody basically, they're laughing up their sleeves at him, going, what on earth does he think he looks like? It's obviously a man. And it's not just that it's a man dressed in an outlandish way. And this is very much the case. Autogynephiles who do actually transition in later life, they have to learn how to be women. And part of that process is how to learn to be women by modern standards. Because ordinarily, they would get on their knee-length leg warmers and their striped polos and whatever else was fashionable at the time that they established their artefact, and they'd wear that, and the therapist would look at them and go, you can't go out like that. Don't be ridiculous. This is 2022. People don't wear that kind of stuff anymore. Of course, he hasn't a clue what women actually do, what women look like. Excuse the dogs. He has no idea. When he looks at women, he doesn't really see women. He just sees himself reflected in them. Right? Then this is a really central part of autogynephilia. The autogynephile is absolutely obsessed with his own self-image, and he applies it to everything. And it all is a reflection of himself. So when he looks at a woman now, he's kind of looking at that woman as she might have been 30 years ago, but at the same age. It's very, very complicated. So this is why we get this situation where autogynephiles typically will have this tendency to dress in manners that suggest, basically time travel. That they're looking like something that might have been possibly quite fashionable and sexy in 1985, and really isn't now. It's just inappropriate. Most autogynephiles, this is certainly the ones who have, now this is obviously most applicant to those who are transvestic, because there are other ways of expressing autogynephilia, and many of those are not affected in this manner by fashion, really. But they're still very much based on the person's self-image as a boy at the time that he began to masturbate. So they will imagine themselves having very slender feminine bodies, for example, when in fact you're looking at a 240-pound, well overweight, middle-aged man. But they think they're cute. They still think they're cute. Because the self-image is actually more important than the real image. When they look in the mirror, they don't actually see themselves. They see this thing, this succubus that has occupied their bodies. And of course, if they do actually transition, then this becomes a real problem for everybody around them. I mean, there's no way that a person like this can really pass off being a woman. It just isn't going to happen. And there are autogynephiles who do manage to succeed, but the thing is, they transitioned in adolescence. And so, a transitioner like that, an autogynephilic transitioner like that, say she transitioned, became at the age of, say, 14 or 15, maybe in 2005. Well, now it's 2022, so that's 17 years later. But she'll have followed all of the changes in fashion and so on that have happened in the meantime. So her body and her body self-image will have kind of matured in a normal way, right? Because she has got older and she's been looking at herself in the mirror while she plonks it off, But for the one who just suddenly comes out, no. They don't have that experience. So they're going to appear in a way that people are going to find really outlandish and really strange. The other thing, of course, is that autogynephiles don't know how to behave like women, for the very obvious reason that they are not actually women. I mean, that's basic, right? An autogynephilic male is never a woman. He's a facsimile of a woman, and may be good at it. More likely than not, he's not very good at it, and he will certainly have to learn how to be a woman. And again, for the early transitioning autogynephile, this is relatively easy, because that person will be observing the women around him as he's a teenager, and learning to act as they do. And that's why Many such people who did actually become aware of their autogynephilia and act on it, they didn't know it was autogynephilia. And when they started to express this in their teens, they thought they were gay, because it's like, gay men behave in a feminine manner, and right, I want to appear in a feminine manner, so therefore I must be gay. They're not gay. These are not homosexuals, they are non-homosexual. They don't actually like being touched by men. About 20%, according to Blanchard, and I think it's actually, in Asia it's probably more for cultural reasons, and in the West I think it's rather less, also for cultural reasons, are able to suppress their natural masculine repulsion towards masculine bodies and allow themselves to actually have sex with men. But it is even here, it's a minority. You'll find that the AGPs here, unless they're actually involved in sex work, which quite a few are, they're not really interested in having physical contact with men. And when you see them around, they're always with other women. They're not with boyfriends, unless the boyfriend is a Westerner and he hasn't realised what's going on and he's being soaked for money, basically. Just to be blunt, that's what happens. They use their pseudo-feminine wiles and their appearance, which can be quite striking. You know, if you take someone who has been taking hormones since they were 16, which is the typical age for an autogynephile to realise themselves here, by the time that person is 23 or 24, he's probably a pretty good-looking woman, to be honest with you. I mean, she will have suppressed any masculinization. That which she already had will not be too obvious because this is Asia. And she will have learned how to make herself look sexy as a woman. And she might not her model of what being a woman is might be a little bit strange to other women. They might go, that's odd. But to randy men, it's fine. It's perfect, you know. That's what they want. They want this gratuitously sexy, over-the-top woman who happens to be 6'4", you know, and that sort of thing. So this explains why you get this this weird fashion sense that is often seen in middle-aged autogynephiles, that they seem to be flashing back to this period in their youth, to fashions that they experienced and saw around them when they were that age. And it's because that's when their autogynephilic artefact was actually formed. That's when the etle was created, right? And so it naturally produces, or tries to reproduce itself in those terms. And since it hasn't been out, you know, it hasn't been out in public in the way that someone who transitioned at the age of 16 might be, this has been suppressed, kept in a closet, kept in a locker for all these years. When it does come out, it looks absolutely ridiculous. It looks absolutely ridiculous. And as I say, you can go online and you will find many resources and therapists charging enormous amounts of money for training these men how to behave like women. Now, the fact is, if you were actually feminine in the way that an HSTS is, the thing is that if you were actually feminine in the way that an HSTS, that is a completed congenital sexual invert, is completely naturally feminine, why would you need to learn it? Why would you need to go to a course in how to sit down like a woman? Why would you need to go to a course that would teach you how to modulate your voice like a woman, how to walk like a woman? And yet, that is exactly what autogynephiles do. They have to, because they have no clue. They're men. They've always been men. Sure, if they transitioned at 16, they probably have learned by the time they're 24 how to do it. Although I can promise you that the mask will slip from time to time. But they're able to act the role. But a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old has no chance of being convincing as a woman. And it's typical of them that you find that, well, not only do they not really look like women, but their behaviour is bizarre, to put it mildly, and grating. It's like, this is not right. This doesn't feel right. There's something wrong here. And of course, the something wrong is, the person that we're talking about here isn't a woman at all. It's a man playing the role of a woman. And unfortunately, he has not been very well trained to do it. So this is what happens. So you need to understand that autogynephilia, it doesn't appear when you're 50 or 60 or whatever. It simply doesn't. It's been there. It's been there for decades. It actually appeared when you started masturbating. The first time you jerked off in your sister's underpants, that's when it started. That is when it started. And you've been suppressing it. If you're an autogynephile, you've been suppressing it all these years. I don't ever think suppression and repression are good. I think these are bad things. I think these lead to potentially very serious psychological issues. And I don't think you should do it. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that everybody who has autogynephilia should be flouncing around in girly clothes. I'm not saying that. But you do need to learn how to manage it. You do need to learn how to cope with this and deal with it, such that you can actually have the kind of life that you want, and not the one that the artefact wants. That's something else altogether, while still remaining somewhat sane, which is not easy. Remember that anyone with autogynephilia has two personalities. Well, really a real personality and a pseudo-personality inside their heads. And they're in conflict all the time. And I've already discussed this. The artifact's personality is deeply hostile towards the host. Always. The host absolutely adores her. And this is not a good relationship. This is a very caustic relationship. Not good for anybody. So some level of management is really necessary. If you're 14, 15, 16 and you feel you have to do this, then the answer is get on the hormones as quick as you can. And just do it. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And some of these people will probably detransition when they're in the mid-30s or 40s. It's kind of the opposite of what the standard pattern is, because they no longer have their looks. And it's like, I can't fight this any longer. And they just detransition. Some won't. Some will continue. If they've been lucky, they have naturally good bone structure, and they've mainly been consistent with their hormones, then they can keep going. But there are a number of examples. I'm not going to say any names. There are a number of well-known examples of people who claim to be, and I quote, true transsexuals, and even some who claim to be HSTS, and they are obviously not sexual inverts. They're obviously not, because they managed to get away with it when they were 25 and 35. Now that they're 65, it's like, I don't think so. The effects of age can be pretty drastic on women, excuse my Doug, but on autogynephiles, they are devastating in terms of looks, devastating. So anyway, that's enough for today. That is how and why autogynephiles have these bizarre representations of themselves, which most people will have noticed. Thank you. Excuse me while I go and shout at the dogs. Hands up!